2:20 p.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194, Jafashid. I woke up to a banging on the hull, raising my head slowly. I checked to see if I was bleeding and was glad to note that I wasn't. I looked over to Lauren and noticed that she had fallen from her chair. On the floor next to her was Ernest. From where I was sitting they looked okay, just unconscious. Taking a look in the cockpit window, which was somehow still intact, I noticed that we went down pretty hard. I couldn't see anything but dirt. The room was lit with the last of the power. The banging, which had ceased, started again. I could hear yelling outside, but couldn't make it out. A small sliver of light began cutting through the stifling air as the dirt at the top of the windshield was scooped away. A face appeared in the gap, then waved. I smiled and returned the gesture. It was Daniel Jackson of SG-1. I stood from my chair, noting the slanted floor, and turned to wake Ernest and Lauren. As they groaned to life, I exited to the main compartment, found and shook Mayor Silmet awake. Thankfully, there were no major injuries, just bumps and bruises from the crash. Still somewhat lightheaded, I stumbled up the slant of the crashed ship and into the cargo compartment, where crates of equipment were now distributed awkwardly against the front wall. I pushed them aside and made a move for the rear hatch, unsure if it would work. The large square door was warped, but still sealed tight. I pulled the emergency release and the two large electric motors whined, pushing the heavy metal ramp out of its place and downwards to meet the ground. Fortunately for me, the ship wasn't at too crazy an angle, and a connection was made with the dirt after a couple of extra seconds. Surrounding the exit to my derelict were the 4 members of the original SG-1, Teal'c, Colonel Samantha Carter, Daniel Jackson, and General O'Neill. It was notable how little they aged. I straightened up and stepped into the harsh afternoon light. "You took a tumble, Admiral," O'Neill said. "Are you all right?" Yeah, I think I'm fine." I checked myself over again, making sure there wasn't any unusual pain in my extremities or head. After a crash like that, a concussion was a real worry. "Just a bit bruised, that's all." "We saw you hit from the top floor of the town hall," Jackson chimed in. "We thought you were done for." From behind me, Lauren stepped around the skewed crates. "I've been through harder a crash than that," she said. "We'll be fine. Even Kopar's doing okay." "Kopar?" I asked. She looked confusedly at me for a minute. "Yeah, Mayor Silmet. He didn't tell you his first name?" "I guess he wasn't hitting on me," I replied. I turned back around to face SG-1 as Ernest and Kopar followed in Lauren's footsteps. "What did we miss, SG-1? How long was I out?" And at that moment, the glare fading, I managed to look past the team of soldiers and out onto what used to be the town square of Jafashid. The place was a smoking crater, the ground zero of an apocalyptic artillery hit. Sand around the edges had been burned into a charred glass, and the cobblestone and dirt roads had been pulverized. Every building within a good half-kilometer had been leveled absolutely. The fountain, which just hours before had been an elegantly carved statue in the center of town, was vaporized. "It's been about 3 hours," Samantha Carter replied. "We've been keeping tabs on your ship since then." And the woman in command said they're in rough shape. They found a place to land and recoup their losses." "Where's that?" 5 kilometers south of here, there's a flat piece of desert large enough to park a starship. We're supposed to meet them there in 2 hours' time." "Well, we're not walking 5 clicks across the desert in the middle of the day. Pile on in, I'll see what I can do." Just then, Kopar made his way to the front of the crowd. "Oh my." He stared out into the crater that was once Jafashid's center of commerce. "That is the result of terrifying power. But are the replicators truly dead?" Sam and Jack looked at each other before she continued. We don't know. As far as I can tell, they were all destroyed in the blast, but that only accounts for the ones that were here. Do you know how many were on this planet to begin with?" "No." Sam began to say something again, but I interjected. Once we get the Admiral's sensors back up and running, the probes we left in orbit should be able to tell us, now that we know what we're looking for. I shoved the lever back into its original position after everyone filed into the cargo compartment. The motors whined again, de-extending the ramp and pulling it back up until it was almost flush with the rear of the craft. Then the subtle warp from the impact caused one edge to catch before the other, and ended with the door cocked awkwardly sideways, bent and half shut, stuck just a bit open on the left side. Well, that's not airtight, I sighed. You guys have fun in here. Ernest, see if you can ring up the Admiral again. Lauren, Sam, come with me. I walked into the main compartment and pulled open a hatch on the floor. The stairs it revealed led down into the engine room. With no windows and mostly buried at the moment anyways, darkness abounded. On the panel at the bottom of the stairs I groped around for the activation switch. This auxiliary control had a battery backup in case of emergency, but something was wrong with it. It never wanted to charge. I turned back towards the stairs and looked up into the compartment above. Sam and Lauren stood awaiting my command, but chatting amongst themselves. I wondered how long it had been for either of them. Anyone got a flashlight? I could use a hand down here. Preferably a hand with a flashlight in it. I've got you covered, Sam replied. She came carefully down the metal stairs and pulled a compact LED light from her belt. Waving it around the darkened space gave the reactors, large machines with protruding pipes and wire coils mounted along the walls, eerie shadows. Wait, over there. I motioned to my left. We were facing the rear of the ship, so that was the right reactor. It was the master one, and now had a light shining upon it. Cut into the side was a set of manual controls which I had installed, just in case. Now I was thankful I had. I stepped over to it and twisted the handle, and the cover clicked open. Behind it was a small array of levers and dials, a condensed version of the massive upper console in the cockpit above. All right. Now comes the tricky part. I gave the radon knob a little twist, and the assembly began to rumble. A deep spraying noise echoed inside of the cylindrical container. Before long, the pressure needle began to climb, and I was tempted to press the fire button that was sitting right there. But then I remembered that the console's cover was part of the outer lining, and that without it shut, I was in danger of exposing myself to serious amounts of radiation. I closed the hatch and turned back to the stairs. "Hey, Lauren," I called. "How does it look up there?" "Got pressure," she replied. "Controls are unresponsive, still no charge. Try checking the connections to the AI computer." She mumbled something else, followed by, "Could be sucking all the power." "Sam, do you have another flashlight?" I asked. "I don't, but hold on a sec." She turned up the stairs, leaving me in darkness. A few moments later she appeared again. "Here you go," she said, and tossed a light similar to hers down to me. "All right, thanks." I clicked it on. "Go ahead and take a look at the secondary generator up here. Let me know if it's producing anything." "All right, is there a readout on here?" "I'm not sure. If there is, it should be obvious. Unless Lauren installed it." "Hey," echoed from upstairs. I think I see it," Sam said, "but 0.223 megawatts? Something's not right. Let me see if I can..." At that moment, several things occurred. Sam pulled a large breaker, which broke the resistance circuit, allowing current to flow freely. Lauren, in futility, stepped on both of the anti-gravity pedals, jump-starting the system by force. And I, looking back at Sam, tripped over a bundle of cables, yanking them from the AI matrix, antenna array, and primary control panels. With a heave, the bat out of hell began to rise slowly from the dirt. And a few seconds later, I no longer needed the flashlight, as the power came back on. But because there wasn't any fission or fusion going on, the actual wattage produced was still quite minimal. It was just being created from the radiating heat. We hung about 2 feet above the ground as the single engine continued to hiss. I got to my feet and proceeded to the center console. "Sam, go help Lauren up there. It takes 2 to make this ship work well." She made a move for the stairs, and I added, "Tell her to start the second reactor and get the power flowing." "All right," she said, and clomped up the stairs. I turned back to the console and brought up the commands for the primary reactor. After a few seconds making sure the controls hatch was latched tight, I pressed the fire button. Beside me, the large engine body turned from a hiss to a rumble, and moments later the fusion reactor behind it followed suit. "There we go!" Lauren yelled from the cockpit above. "Power!" "We are underway," I called proudly back, and turned my attention to the mess of cables I'd made. But in moving my vision in that direction, I noticed something that I hadn't in the darkness. The right engine, the whole 30-foot-long contraption, was shifted about an inch towards the bow. The brackets holding it to the floor and ceiling were warped, and some of the welds had sheared away. It was a bit unsettling, but it didn't seem to be shifting too much as we flew, so I ignored it for the time being. I'd fix it when I got home. After reattaching all the cables that had become separated, I returned to the cockpit. The two scientists were having a delightful time flying, so I let them be and stepped back into the main compartment, where the remainder of my impromptu crew were sitting. Conversation had sparked up in the meantime. Kopar was talking to Daniel Jackson, and Ernest had started a sarcastic back and forth with O'Neill. Teal'c was looking on, vaguely amused. As I sat down to ask what was going on, Daniel stopped me. He had in his hand a copy of The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, and seemed particularly intrigued while trying to explain something to Kopar. "Did you know Ernest is a mage?" "Wait, what?" I turned quickly to look at the dark-skinned soldier. "Why didn't you tell me?" Distracted from his conversation, he suddenly became quite nervous. I don't like to talk about it. I'm not very good." "Good at what? What are you trained as?" "Oh, elemental, destruction, compressing and expanding stuff. Air, mostly." He did not seem at all confident in his abilities. "Have you been practicing? We have the sorcery dojo back at Mabel's. There are more than a few good teachers down there." "No, I never really got around to it," he relented. "Well, I'm giving you leave off the Admiral when we get back. You will hone your skills, okay?" "Yes, sir," he smiled. "Fantastic," I said. "And hey, I'm glad I know." I turned to leave the cabin and check on Sam and Lauren when the guide again caught my eye. The small book-like computer contains a staggering amount of information, and is a must-have for the galactic traveler. I had only one question. "Jackson, where did you get that?" He stared at me for a moment, unsure how to respond. With the unusual tone of someone quite confused, he finally said, "You gave it to me, actually." He paused, a look of worry crossing his face. "Oh, wait. You told me not to tell you that." "Great job, Jackson," O'Neill interjected. "Although you did say not to worry about it because I'd tell you anyways," he finished. "Yeah, I suppose I would have to say that," I noted in a faraway voice. "If I did indeed tell him all that, then it must have been at some point in my future, and of course in his past. There was no way to tell how far, though, and I didn't want to pry. I'll try and remember that. We just made a time loop." "Yeah, you did say that you were happy you—" "Don't tell me too much," I cut him off. "Learning about your own future is cheating. Sort of. You know, you're kind of repeating yourself." "I'm not to me!" "You know what? Never mind. I'm gonna go check on the girls." I turned towards the cockpit once more, stepping past the weapon tube and through the door. 4:34 p.m. local time, Monday, April 14th, 2194, Jafashian Desert. We were standing in a line at the edge of a mesa, somewhere to the south of Jafashid. The Battle to Hell had made it, somehow, and we were now overlooking the desert plain where the Admiral was supposed to land. But their orders to keep your eyes on the skies were null and void, since the cloud cover rolled in. "This is troubling," Mayor Silmet noted, coming out of thought. "Don't suppose it normally rains here, then?" O'Neill replied sarcastically. "No," Kopar said, a worried hand on his chin. "It does not." The growl of rolling thunder echoed from the distant rocky highlands. Well, I'm not standing here in the rain. If it starts raining, I'm going inside. He motioned towards the Battle to Hell's opened rear hatch. Sam? Well, I guess there's no sense getting rained on, she concurred. Indeed, Teal'c added. But we didn't need to worry about the rain. Moments later there was a glint of blue and silver in the mottled sky, and the clouds parted to reveal the descending shape of the Admiral. Like a ragged angel, the battered starship glided effortlessly downward. The thick landing gear on the rear section stretched and made contact with the floor of the sandy wasteland. That was damn impressive. Kopar's sentiment echoed in the looks on the others' faces. Smiling, I turned and strolled back into the Battle to Hell, where the Admiral's transmission was already coming through. "The bay is ready, Admiral. Copy?" I could hear Marty chanting. I picked up the radio and replied, "We'll be there in a few minutes, Marty. Just keep those doors open." He chuckled. "We couldn't close them if we wanted to." "Yeesh, don't get me worried. I hardly want to see my ship in a state like this." "If I don't, something else will. Just come over here soon." The line descended into static. Behind me, SG-1 and the rest came solemnly parading into the shuttle. There was chatter coming from the group, the lowered type used when something was found awe-inspiring. The crooked door clunked shut behind them, and I kicked on the engines with the care of a surgeon. The rumbling carried us tremulously down the red rock slope, dragged us through the thick air on the canyon floor, and brought us into the looming shadow of the broken Colossus. Above us in the saucer section the sparks of welders gleamed in the shade. It was only then that I truly understood the sorry state of the Admiral. The hull was ragged, with girders exposed like broken bones. Battered and singed titanium plates fell away from the nacelles as workers ejected them, cutting away parts that were too damaged to be of any use, even if they were melted down. The shuttle bay had received several direct hits. The thick doors were but two slivers of metal, burned into place in the open position. The shuttles were trashed, half of them thrown into the supports that separated the individual holding cells. Those, of course, were bent, and there were teams already repairing and replacing them. "Your men worked fast," Kopar said as we encroached into the hangar. The large window at the far end of the darkened, wrecked room, behind which Marty had been sitting just hours ago, was virtually gone, shattered by some replicator weapon. Yet somehow still, that room was lit, close to spotless, and I could almost feel Marty's happy-go-lucky demeanor, cheesy humor, and an inherent propensity for cleaning, from my own cockpit. As the wall approached, I made out his tall, bright face, pointed lock of brown hair, and finally the old-style reporter's microphone that he insisted on using. He was sitting behind his metal desk, organized to a T and waiting patiently for our arrival. As the lurching Battle of Hell came into its place at the end of the wrecked hangar, he waved at us. "Marty, is our bay all right?" I spoke into the radio, and then watched him answer. "Put her down carefully." "I think it's good and sound, but I wouldn't put my savings on it." "Thanks, Marty." I eased the shuttle around the corner and then backed into the second-story holding bay. I didn't bother trying the landing gear, and we sunk down onto the metal. With a terrible groan it bent, the structure shook, and the Battle of Hell came to a crooked halt. We left the ship through the rear hatch and left it down. I'd have to come back down here later and replace it, but I didn't worry too much. Extending ramp rear hatches are fairly common, and I figured that I could pull one off of another shuttle. Lagging behind so that I could think, Lauren led the way out of the dismal shuttle bay, and in through engineering. I looked to my left and right. Containment barriers had fallen in front of 3 of the 4 reactors. Several technicians were all over the 4th, working to keep it going. I gave them the turn of my gaze, and one, kneeling nearly underneath the console, returned a sideways salute. Lauren proceeded through a doorway and out of my sight, the others trailing her. I wanted to stop and talk, ask the workers what was wrong, but followed nothing nonetheless. I'd find out later. There was too much to do. The next section was dark. An empty, spooky corridor. Something must have broken. Some sort of conduit snapped in the struggle. What struck me as unusual as we passed sealed doors and shattered panels was the location of the power outage. The hallway just outside of section PC-1. Primary power control. If there was a power failure here, I thought, then the rest of the ship must be virtually starved of power. Of course, there were other possibilities. For example, the Admiral's saucer section was still hanging high above the canyon, requiring the anti-gravitation units to remain active. Cortana knew this, and could have simply been siphoning away power for them. Yet something made me think otherwise. I cast a suspicious eye on the sealed PC-1 door as we passed, before Lauren yanked open the hatch to the emergency neck staircase, blowing a bright light into the corridor. The shadows flickered along as SG-1 and the rest proceeded through the opening. The turbolifts were too far gone to be used right now, so we ascended on emergency-only stairways and ladders to the bridge. When we finally got there, I noticed the horrific mess. The dome had been torn open, like some destroyed aluminum cap, ripped up down the middle, split by some impact that I'd been 100 miles away for, when I should have been right there in my chair. Had it been a better day, Cortana would have been undoubtedly waiting in said chair, teasing me by occupying the seat only I was supposed to hold. Instead, with electricity at a constrictive low, she stood on a discreet holographic pedestal, nestled in the railing directly behind my seat of power. The blue woman looked at me with a mix of troubled emotions. My entourage echoed the worry, awe, and fear. "Replicators did this?" Kopar asked. "The metal kind," O'Neill interjected. "They can be pretty bad." "To be honest, Ellis," Daniel gave his regards, "I'd say you're pretty lucky." "Lucky?" I turned to him, my face twisted. "Sam saved it. We've never seen a ship survive a replicator attack. Not one of ours, anyways. We always had to bail." "Yeah, even the Asgard got their asses kicked," O'Neill said nonchalantly. Lauren turned to add something, and then a flashing console caught her eye. "What on earth?" As she wandered off around the side of the bridge, I turned my attention to the AI in front of me. "What's the situation like, Cortana?" "Not good," she replied. "We're down one person for every 4 aboard. We've got breaches all over the ship, and we're low on power." "How long until we can shove off?" "Best estimate is 12 hours. If the team can stabilize the 4th reactor, we can dump the other 3. The shuttle bay needs to be seriously repaired, and don't get me started with up here. But anywhere from 12 hours to a day, at best estimate." "Anything else seriously broken?" "Well, we lost contact with PC computer, and the door's sealed shut. You have the code, right?" PC computer was the name for the semi-dumb AI that resided in the Admiral's power systems. I'd named it that simply because of its job, PC standing for power control, and that name precisely was usually deemed redundant by new crew until they figured out what it meant. It was classed as a semi-dumb because, while it was designed to be dumb, it gave some telltale characteristics of self-awareness. Either way, it seemed completely content with its job, so we let it be. "Of course I do," I told her. "Who sealed it?" "No one. As I said, we lost contact. PC computer sealed it. At least I assume so." "And you lost contact with him?" "Yes." "I wouldn't be so sure," Lauren interjected from across the room. The console in front of her was flashing all sorts of reds and yellows. "What did you do?" I asked. Cortana stammered. "But that station was dead 10 minutes ago." "It's not anymore," Lauren said triumphantly, despite the fact that it had been erupting with messages before she had touched it. "I'm receiving a string of error messages from PC Computer, and they're repeating in a cycle. I think he's corrupted." "Well, what are they?" "Alert, hull breach, intruder alert, power failure, and then a timestamp." Cortana, what happened at 10:35 and 27 seconds?" She clicked through her log files for a moment and then responded. "Nothing particularly. We were in the middle of maneuver Delta 4 and had just started to vent the number 2 reactor. Did anything happen just before that? At 10:33 and 13 seconds, there was a barrage of replicator probes that entered through the shuttle bay. Lauren and I exchanged glances. Well, I know what happened in PC-1, she concluded.
Now what?